We have forgotten one of the most effective instruments of human contact in a society that prizes continual communication, relentless sharing, and performative transparency. Deliberate quiet. The really successful operator knows when to stop and employs that silence as a weapon, while everyone else is busy declaring their intents, airing their ideas, and exposing their plans. The Florentine philosopher and political thinker Niccolò Machiavelli of the 16th century grasped this idea more clearly than most. Though well known for his direct counsel in The Prince, Machiavelli's most powerful observations usually center on what should not be uttered. He said, realizing that speaking generates appearances while silence protects reality, the vulgar rabble constantly is drawn by appearances. Those who grasp strategic silence not only defend their stance but also do something that regular communicators cannot in an era of oversharing. They succeed when others are still debating success. The price of needless speech. Machiavelli lived in a time of political intrigue where words of carelessness might result in exile or execution. Even in our less deadly modern environment, however, superfluous speech creates weaknesses that silence avoids. Men in general evaluate more by the eyes than by the hands, Machiavelli said, since everyone can see but few can feel. While exposing nothing about what may really be felt or known, the person who talks non-stop gives everyone chances to see and evaluate. Every word you say costs something that silence does not. Speech first generates obligations. Declared intentions link you to them in others' view, cause you to veer off course and give you a bad impression as dishonest or hypocritical. Keep quiet on your intentions. You keep your freedom to change without explanation or apologies. Second, speaking reveals your limited perspective and mental process. More you explain, more you expose about how your mind operates. Knowledge others could use to forecast, control, or counter you. Looking at the folks Machiavelli observed surrounding a king is the first approach for approximating his intelligence. In the same vein, one's first approach for gauging someone's strategic capacity is to pay close attention to how much they reveal needlessly. Third, and maybe most crucially, obsessive talking reduces your mystique and power. Machiavelli famously noted, "It is more safer to be feared than adored." Fear calls for distance. Distance calls for some degree of mystery. The leader who clarifies every choice, defends every behavior, and discusses every idea becomes commonplace. The ordinary cannot demand the same respect as the extraordinary. Think through how this might apply in contemporary settings. The coworker who shows up for every meeting weighs in on every problem regardless of experience, therefore progressively loses influence. The friend who posts every aspect of their life on social media becomes boring rather than fascinating. The negotiator who uses compromises to fill awkward pauses loses leverage. The leader who answers every critique validates the naysayers and lowers their own profile. Machiavelli would see our present obsession with openness and frequent communication as strategic malpractice, a voluntary surrender of power that gives others information without guaranteeing corresponding value in return, not as authenticity. The three types of strategic silence. Machiavellian silence isn't only the lack of communication. Depending on the goal, this intentional communicative approach takes several shapes. Knowing these several forms of quiet helps one to see how this strategy works in reality. The first kind is silence for gathering information. Machiavelli noted the intelligent man does at once what the stupid does last. The fool reveals their stance right away, learning nothing about others. Initially silent, the wise person lets others reveal their ideas, goals, and flaws before determining how to react. This strategy generates asymmetric information advantage. Others expose their ideas, but you get insightful information without returning favor. Negotiating. This shows itself as the strong concept that whoever talks first loses. In relationships, it helps to explain why the person who listens more than they say usually understands the dynamics better than the continuous talker. In contests, those who reveal their plans before implementing them usually perform worse than their own capacity. The second kind is silence with power-building effect. Machiavelli saw that perception shapes power in part, and that deliberate reluctance can help to improve perception. He said, "A prince must copy the lion and the fox, as the lion cannot defend itself from traps and the fox cannot defend itself from wolves. Part of the fox's cunning is knowing when speaking lessens rather than increases power. Silence that builds authority works when people automatically fill in knowledge gaps with presumptions that usually benefit the silent party. A leader's comments have more weight when they speak selectively, addressing just important problems instead of every little concern. Someone projects confidence rather than uncertainty when they react to criticism only when absolutely essential, rather than defensively responding every charge. This helps to explain why the most influential people in any field usually speak less, but more thoughtfully, than those under them. The worried junior executive talks over here. The CEO says quick, firm comments. The insecure individual goes into great length. The secure individual declares without explanation. The nervous manager answers every challenge. The confident leader participates just when it is strategically important. Would like more knowledge about how to apply strategic quiet for your benefit? Hit subscription right now. Third type is silence that preserves ambiguity. Machiavelli stated that one should be feared rather than loved when one of the two must be lacking, as it is impossible to connect them together. This well-known insight goes beyond love and fear to any circumstances in which keeping several interpretations helps strategic goals. Silence that preserves ambiguity lets others project their own hopes, anxieties, and interpretations onto your point of view. Ignoring to clarify can appeal to several constituencies with opposing expectations at once. You keep your freedom of action by not pledging allegiance to particular readings. You maintain denials by not clearly supporting any one interpretation. Politicians perfect this strategy by saying imprecise enough that various listeners hear what they want to hear. Good negotiators avoid obvious positions that might prematurely limit possible concessions. Leaders use it to clearly express vision without unduly restricting execution details. Strategic quiet in each circumstance isn't dishonesty. It's the understanding that early clarity typically undercuts rather than helps goals. As Machiavelli noted, morals have nothing to do with politics. According to him, good strategy calls for keeping flexibility that too much communication would jeopardize. Beyond its military benefits, Machiavellian silence has strong psychological impacts not possible with words. Knowing these impacts helps one to explain why quiet usually triumphs where persuasion falls short. Silence starts with creating projection areas. Human minds naturally fill knowledge gaps, usually in ways that mirror their own preoccupations rather than truth. Others put their worries, hopes, or assumptions onto your silence when you remain quiet at pivotal times, therefore exposing their position while you keep yours. Men are so basic and so much prone to follow urgent demands that a deceiver will never lack victims for his deceptions, Machiavelli pointed out. The deliberate silence uses this inclination without resorting to explicit dishonesty. This helps to explain why experienced interrogators choose silence over questioning to get information from hesitant subjects. Silence's discomfort drives the subject to fill the hole, frequently exposing more than direct inquiry would uncover. In negotiations, the same dynamic works. The side that welcomes silence usually gets better terms than the one frantically filling spaces with compromises. Second, in communication dynamics, silence takes the stage. The first speaker, most often or at most length, gently portrays themselves as looking to listeners for validation or acceptance, speaking less, more selectively, or only after others have committed to viewpoints implicitly suggests the judge is rather than the supplicant, his function. Machiavelli would acknowledge this as a statement of his belief that it is better to be feared than loved. Though their silence is not always appreciated, their restraint often calls for respect not possible from volubility. This dynamic helps to explain why job applicants who ask more questions often do better than those who talk more about themselves. It clarifies why the quiet individual in meetings usually gets more serious attention than the active participants. It clarifies why polite silence in disputes usually turns out to be more successful than aggressive debate. Silence in each scenario changes the power dynamic by reversing the usual pattern of seeking acceptance via words. Third, quiet lends mystery that accentuates apparent strength. Men evaluate normally more by the eye than by the touch, as Machiavelli said. This is because it belongs to everyone to see, to few to feel. Often, What cannot be totally seen or understood seems more difficult than what is totally revealed. The individual who shares everything, their ideas, goals, fears, plans, becomes average. The individual who exposes selectively keeps a mystery that accentuates their apparent power. Think on how this works in leadership situations. The leader who breaks out every element of their thought demystizes their position and allows others to regard themselves as equally competent. The leader who communicates conclusions while keeping deliberate processes secret keeps a mystique that supports power. This is about realizing that, rather than about dishonesty, leadership rests in part on the view of capabilities of others that surpasses their own. Transparency is sometimes seen as an absolute value in modern society, and silence as dubious. Simply be real, we are advised. Speak your truth. Talk freely. Though well-meaning, this advice runs counter to Machiavelli's strategic observations regarding power and influence. The promise given was a past requirement. Machiavelli realized that tying oneself to past assertions usually compromises present interests. Hence the term broken is a necessary tool of the present. Transparency's modern fetishizing calls for exactly this form of binding, a deliberate restriction on future behavior in honor of present authenticity. This is not in support of dishonesty. Machiavelli's strategy was selective disclosure, providing what helps goals while hiding what doesn't, not about lying. Never try to gain by force, he counseled. What can be won by dishonesty? In modern terms, this can mean never try to achieve by needless disclosure what can be won by deliberate silence. The transparency trap shows up in several ways. At business environments, it seems as the need to voice half-formed thoughts at meetings, present works in progress before they're ready for evaluation, or expose bargaining positions before knowledge of the other side's limits. In personal relationships, it becomes early emotional disclosure, pointless confession of past mistakes, or thorough communication of future plans yet open to change. Machiavelli would see these actions as strategic errors that give up power without getting corresponding advantages, not as sincerity. The open person becomes predictable, manipulable, and ordinary, qualities that harm rather than improve influence. This point of view questions modern communication standards that link disclosure with authenticity, with volume with worth. The Machiavellian communicator communicates to forward particular goals rather than simply express herself. They hide to maintain possibilities, not to fool. They remain silent from strategic discipline, not from anxiety. Practical application: the discipline of quiet. How might Machiavelli's quiet approach fit current events? The application is about learning the discipline to talk only when speech suits your interests better than silence. Not about being entirely taciturn. Start with experience in information asymmetry. Make sure you first comprehend others' points of view before expressing your own on any critical issue. Inquire rather than assert anything. Listen for what is left unsaid instead than reacting just to what is clearly communicated. As Machiavelli counseled, the fox cannot defend itself against wolves, and the lion cannot guard against traps. To identify traps, one must thus be a fox. To scare wolves, a lion. The fox's cunning starts with little revealed information collecting. In negotiations, where knowledge of the other party's actual priorities and limits usually counts more than expressing your own, this strategy becomes especially helpful. It also applies to workplace relationships, where recognizing colleagues' worries and motivations before committing to roles helps to avoid needless confrontation and promotes more successful influence. Second, foster strategic uncertainty when clarity would prematurely restrict choices. This means keeping flexibility by minimizing needless specificity, not necessarily confounding on purpose. Machiavelli advised a prince to be quite slow to believe and to act. He should not exhibit fear either. This slowing down to commit preserves freedom of action. In leadership situations, this could imply stating goals and vision, while leaving implementation specifics free for change. In personal partnerships, it could mean showing dedication to common objectives, while still allowing freedom concerning particular routes. Under competition, it would mean hiding strategies while rivals expose theirs. Third, grow at ease with quiet as your power posture. Most individuals find silence in conversation to be uncomfortable and hurried to fill it. Often, this reveals more than meant or results in unneeded compromises. Training oneself to welcome these times instead of filling them will have major benefits. This shows up in talks as letting quiet follow your position instead of nervously qualifying or undermining it. In arguments, it seems as if one listens totally to criticism before answering instead of interrupting with justifications. In leadership, it comes out as making decisions based on their merits and trusting the choice without needless rationalization. Machiavelli's strategic whisper of silence does not advise silence only. It calls for speaking just when it will help you achieve your goals more than quiet. The master of this method establishes a purposeful contrast between what is revealed and what is kept private, rather than keeping total concealment. Machiavelli noted, "Looks always captivate the nasty crowd. The world is mostly composed of them. Those who practice selective disclosure stand out in a world when most individuals show everything. Their statements have more weight exactly because they were selected with more thought. Their more strategically exposed places attract greater attention. Their impact increases when it is used more sensibly." In modern society, this technique calls for discipline that is becoming unusual. It requires the patience to listen before speaking, the restraint to hold back even when revelation seems momentarily fulfilling, and the strategic ability to see when quiet might be more appropriate than conversation. These traits don't grow organically in a society that values constant expression, but they do have benefits exactly because they're rare. Machiavelli's quiet approach has final irony in that its most successful practitioners remain mostly unappreciated. While the masters of strategic silence reach their goals without drawing attention to their techniques, we observe the noisy, expressive, transparent approach. Some are still talking about winning, others shut up and win. Maybe this clarifies why Machiavelli himself, despite his great impact on political philosophy and strategy, is still much misinterpreted. Though his name has come to be associated with merciless manipulation, his ideas expose a deeper knowledge of human psychology and power dynamics that surpasses basic brutality. He understood that influence need not necessarily call for force or dishonesty. Sometimes it just means knowing when to say nothing and let others expose themselves. Machiavelli's quiet approach provides a counterintuitive road to influence in a time of information overload, opinion saturation, and compulsive sharing. Say less, see more, expose selectively. Let your findings speak louder than your words. Those who grasp this strategy not only participate, but also dominate the never-ending struggle for attention and power.